I spread 35 years of notebooks across my desk in the small cabin I'd called home since my early days at Glacier National Park. The oldest journal, its leather cover cracked and faded from years in my backpack, dated back to 1987, my first year as a forest ranger. Back then, I'd been meticulous about logging daily activities, trail conditions, wildlife sightings, visitor interactions, all laid out in my precise handwriting. My finger traced the date on the newest notebook, September 15th, 2022. My last official day on the job was 3 weeks away. The thought left a hollow feeling in my chest. The cabin creaked as a gust of wind pushed against its wooden walls. Outside my window, pine trees swayed, their shapes dark against the evening sky. I took a deep breath, catching the scent of wood smoke from my fireplace mixing with the coffee in my mug. Retirement papers sat signed and ready on the corner of my desk. After decades in the wilderness, I was leaving. But I couldn't go without doing this first. I pulled out a fresh notebook, leather-bound, like my first one, a gift from the staff. The blank pages waited for the stories I'd spent years avoiding putting into words. Not the mundane incidents that filled my official reports, but the other events, the ones that had kept me awake on countless nights. When I started this job, I believed I understood the dangers of the wilderness. Bears, sudden storms, hypothermia, careless hikers. These were the threats I'd been trained to handle. My first years passed in a blur of rescuing lost campers, treating sprained ankles, and giving wildlife safety talks to tourists who seemed more interested in taking photos than listening to warnings. I reached for the photo frame on my bookshelf. 5 smiling rangers stood arm in arm in front of the St. Mary Visitor Center. Greg Mills, our supervisor, stood in the center, his weathered face creased with laugh lines, even with his serious expression. Beside him was Nate Harris, my patrol partner for most of my career, his auburn hair ruffled by the wind. I was on the end, looking impossibly young and confident. Greg had taken me aside on my first day. We'd stood on the overlook above Lake McDonald, the water reflecting the surrounding mountains in perfect stillness. "The Park Service manual covers most of what you need to know," he'd said, eyes fixed on the distant shore. "But there are things about this wilderness that aren't in any handbook." I'd waited for him to continue, but he just stared at the lake. "Keep your radio on at all times," he finally added. "Some areas of the park feel wrong. Trust that feeling. Don't investigate alone. And if you see something that doesn't make sense, walk the other way." I'd laughed, thinking it was some kind of initiation prank for the new guy. "I'm serious, Walker," he said, looking directly at me for the first time. "Respect the wilderness not just for the dangers you can name, but for those you can't." I nodded to humor him, but didn't take his warning seriously. Just an old man who'd spent too many years alone in the mountains. 3 years later, I stopped laughing at Greg's advice. I took a sip of my cooling coffee and opened the new notebook to its first blank page. I wrote the date at the top and stopped for a second. Once I started writing down these incidents, there would be no going back. People would read these accounts and think I'd lost my mind. They'd brush off 35 years of service as the crazy talk of a man who'd spent too much time alone. But these records weren't for the public. They were for the rangers who would come after me, especially Kelly, who would take over when I left. If she ran into even one of the things I had, she needed to be better prepared than I was. I wrote the title of the first account, "The Strange Man in the Woods," August 1993. The memory of that night hit me hard. The Mitchell family huddled around their campfire, the wife's hands shaking as she told us about the figure watching them from the trees. The weird way the man moved when we confronted him. It was the first time I'd felt that off feeling Greg had warned me about, like I was seeing something that shouldn't be real. I started to write, the words coming easier than I thought they would. I put in every detail I remembered, the spot near Lake McDonald, the time of night, how the figure jerked when it moved, how fast he ran into the forest. I wrote about how the dogs wouldn't track him, and how we found nothing even after 5 days of searching. As I wrote, other memories came back. The weird staircase Nate found in 1995, Emma Clark drowning in water that barely reached her knees, the fog that made people lose their way. Each weird thing made it harder to tell myself that everything had a normal explanation for what was happening in the far corners of the park. Outside, it was completely dark now. I turned on my desk lamp, making a small spot of light in my cabin. The corners seemed extra dark tonight. I checked my watch. Almost midnight. I'd been writing for hours, caught up in remembering that first weird encounter. My coffee was cold, but I barely noticed as I kept writing everything down. This was just the beginning. I needed to write down all the incidents the same way, without leaving anything out. The wind got stronger, shaking the windows. A branch scraped against the side of the cabin. Years ago, noises like that might have made me jumpy. Now they were just normal sounds of where I lived. I finished writing about the Mitchell family, including how I watched their car drive away down the park road. They were too scared to stay another night, even though they had planned to stay for a week. I sat back and read what I'd written. All the facts were there, written as clearly as I could. But writing it down couldn't really show how wrong that night felt. How thick the air seemed when the figure showed up, how quiet the forest got. The feeling that we had seen something old and dangerous that usually stays hidden. I closed the notebook. One down, lots more to go. Tomorrow I would write about the next incident. I needed to record each story, not as ghost stories, but as useful information for the rangers who would walk these trails after me. I looked at the stack of my old journals, each one with short-coded notes about the weird stuff mixed in with normal daily logs. For decades, I'd been careful to keep my official reports focused on things that wouldn't make people question me. Now, with retirement coming up, I didn't need to be so careful anymore. I stood and stretched, my lower back aching from sitting too long. Getting ready for bed, I glanced at the dark shapes of the pines through my window. They stood tall, like they were watching over the space between my cabin and the huge wilderness beyond. Tomorrow meant another day of patrol, another hike on trails I knew well that sometimes took me to strange places. But tonight, I had started writing down the truth about what I'd seen. Not to get famous or have people believe me, but as a warning and guide for those coming after me. I turned off the lamp and went to my bedroom, leaving the notebook stacked neatly on the desk. In the darkness, I could almost hear Greg's voice from all those years ago. There are things about this wilderness that aren't in any handbook. He'd been right. And now, finally, I was writing that handbook. I set my pen down and flexed my cramped fingers. The memory of that first encounter had poured out of me with surprising clarity, considering it happened nearly 30 years ago. I'd been on the job for 6 years by then, long enough to feel confident handling almost any situation the wilderness could throw at me. That confidence wouldn't survive the week. The radio call came in around noon on a Tuesday. I was at the West Glacier Station filing reports when the crackle of static pulled my attention away from paperwork. Dispatch to Walker, come in. The voice belonged to Linda, our daytime dispatcher. I picked up my radio. Walker here. Got a situation at campsite 14 near Lake McDonald. Campers reporting suspicious activity. Can you check it out? On my way. Any details? Family says someone's been watching their campsite at night. Sounds spooked. I grabbed my gear and headed to my truck. August was peak tourist season, and most calls turned out to be overreactions from city folks startled by deer or raccoons. Occasionally, we'd get someone passed out drunk at their campsite or teenagers trying to sneak booze. I figured this would be more of the same. Nate met me at the parking lot, tossing his backpack into my truck as I pulled up. His auburn hair was tucked under his ranger hat, and he had that relaxed smile that never seemed to leave his face. Heard the call, he said, climbing in. Betting it's a black bear looking for food. $10 says they left coolers out. You're on, I said, steering toward Lake McDonald, but my money's on drunk campers from the next site over. The drive took about 20 minutes. going through tall pines and patches of wildflowers. Glacier in August was postcard perfect. Blue skies, mild temperatures, and enough daylight to make the mountains glow. Hard to imagine anyone feeling threatened in such surroundings. We found campsite 14 easily. A blue minivan with Illinois plates was parked beside a large family tent. A smaller tent was set up nearby. A picnic table had the remains of lunch, and camping chairs were placed around a properly built fire pit. Everything looked normal and well organized. A man in his late 30s came over as we got out of the truck. Behind him, a woman about the same age was near the picnic table with 2 children, a boy around 10 and a girl who looked about 8. "Rangers Walker and Harris," I said, showing my badge. "Heard you folks have been having some trouble?" The man stuck out his hand. "David Mitchell. That's my wife Sarah and our kids Jason and Amy." His grip was firm, but I saw a slight tremor in his fingers. "Thanks for coming so quickly. Why don't you tell us what you've been seeing?" Nate said, taking out his notebook. David glanced back at his family before turning to us. "We've been here 3 nights. First night, Sarah thought she saw someone standing at the edge of our campsite just watching us. I grabbed a flashlight, but by the time I looked, there was nobody there. I convinced myself I imagined it," Sarah said, stepping forward. Her voice was steady, but her hands kept fidgeting with her shirt hem. "But the second night, we all saw him." "Him?" I asked. "A man," David confirmed. "Tall, wearing hiking clothes. He just stood there at the tree line, watching us. Didn't move or say anything. I called out, asked if he needed help, but he didn't respond." I pulled out my own notebook. "What time was this?" "After dark, maybe around 10. David looked at his wife, who nodded. "The kids were getting ready for bed. He stood there for at least 15 minutes before disappearing into the trees. We didn't hear him leave. He was just gone when I looked again." "Did you see his face? Any distinguishing features?" Nate asked. Sarah shook her head. "It was too dark, and he stood just beyond where our lantern light reached. But something about the way he stood." She hugged herself. "It wasn't right. I'd heard similar reports before. Most national parks had weird stories, usually just wildlife, prankster campers, or people getting spooked in strange places at night. What about last night?" I asked. "Same thing," David said. "Showed up around the same time, just watching. But last night he came closer. Close enough that Sarah got scared and took the kids into the tent. I stayed out with a lantern and my pocket knife." He looked embarrassed at this admission. "Eventually he backed away into the trees. That's when we decided to call you this morning. I looked around the campsite. Everything was in order. Food properly stored, trash secured. These weren't careless campers. Have you noticed any wildlife in the area? Bears or mountain lions can sometimes trigger that feeling of being watched," I suggested. "We know what bears look like, Ranger Walker," Sarah said firmly. This was a person. "Any problems with neighbors?" Nate gestured toward the nearby campsites. "Anyone who might be messing with you?" David shook his head. "The closest occupied site is 3 spots down. An older couple from Montana. They've been friendly." I walked to the edge of their campsite where the trees began, looking at the ground for footprints or disturbed plants. The soil was hard-packed here, not great for tracking. Nothing stood out. When I returned, Nate was asking about their camping plans. "We're supposed to stay until Sunday," David said. 5 more nights. But honestly, we're thinking of cutting it short. The kids are scared, and after 3 nights of this..." He trailed off. "Here's what we can do," I said. "We'll set up surveillance tonight. If someone's hassling you, we'll catch them." Their faces showed relief. "In the meantime," Nate added, "go about your day normally. Enjoy the park. We'll be back before dark." As we walked back to the truck, I kept my voice low. "What are you thinking?" Nate looked around the surrounding forest before answering. Could be poachers using the area to access the backcountry, or maybe someone's got a drug operation nearby. Those were the two most likely explanations. We occasionally caught people growing marijuana in remote sections of the park or using established trails to transport drugs. They typically didn't like witnesses. "We'll stake out the site tonight," I said. "Bring night vision." We returned to station to file a report and prepare for the night operation. Greg approved our overtime without questions. Either he trusted our judgment, or he knew something we didn't. With Greg, it was often hard to tell. We arrived back at the Mitchells' campsite just before sunset, parking our unmarked vehicle a short distance away. The family seemed more relaxed knowing we were there, going through their evening routine of cooking dinner and playing cards at the picnic table. We checked in briefly, then positioned ourselves in the trees with a clear view of the campsite, about 50 yards apart to cover more ground. The night grew cold as darkness came. Sounds of laughter from the campsite gradually quieted as the children went to bed. Eventually, only David and Sarah remained by the fire, talking in low voices. I checked my watch. 11:45 p.m. The radio at my hip buzzed softly. "Anything on your side?" Nate whispered. "Nothing." "You?" "Just mosquitoes having dinner on my neck." Another hour passed. David and Sarah finally went to their tent around 1 a.m. The campsite got quiet except for the occasional pop from the dying fire. My legs had gotten stiff from crouching in the same position, and I moved carefully to get my blood flowing again. At 2:13 a.m., I remember checking my watch the moment it happened. I noticed movement at the far edge of the campsite. A man came out from the woods, exactly where the Mitchells had told us. He was tall and skinny, wearing what looked like normal hiking stuff, pants, jacket, boots. But something was definitely off about him. Even in the dim light from the fire embers, I could see he moved in weird, jerky motions, like a marionette with tangled strings. I radioed Nate. "Southeast corner. Do you see him?" "I see him," Nate whispered back. "What the hell is wrong with him?" The man stopped at the edge of the clearing, his head tilted in a weird way. He stared at the Mitchells' tent, standing completely still, except for some quick, jerky movements of his head. I put my hand on my holster and walked closer. "Sir," I said firmly but not too loud, "this is Ranger Walker with the National Park Service. I need you to identify yourself." The man turned toward me with a sudden awkward twist. He moved too fast, like something mechanical. When he turned to face me, I could see him clearly in the dying firelight. His mouth was stretched in this huge, stiff smile with too many teeth showing. His eyes looked way too big for his face, and he didn't blink at all. The fire made them shine in the dark, like a deer caught in headlights. He looked human, but in a wrong way, like his face didn't quite fit right. My radio made a static noise. "Tom, something's not right here," Nate said, his voice sounding scared in a way I'd never heard before. The man's head snapped toward my radio, then quickly back to me. His mouth started opening and closing with weird clicking sounds, like he was trying to talk but didn't know how words worked. "Sir, I need you to put your hands where I can see them and state your business here," I said, moving closer. Despite my training, my heart pounded against my ribs. The tent zipper made a scratching noise as David Mitchell poked his head out, probably woken by our voices. The strange man quickly looked at the tent. He made more clicking sounds, faster now, and his body twitched violently. "Stay in the tent," I ordered David. Then to the man, "This is your last warning. Identify yourself now." Nate came up from my right, walking carefully with his flashlight pointed at the man. "Park Service. We need you to..." The man moved. 1 second he was standing. The next he dropped to all fours in a way that looked wrong, like his spine shouldn't bend that way. Before we could do anything, he ran into the forest, crazy fast on his hands and feet like some animal. "What the fuck?" Nate gasped, breaking into a run after him. I sprinted to catch up, flashlight beam bouncing wildly through the trees. We crashed through bushes, following the sound of snapping twigs and disturbed leaves. The beam caught glimpses of movement ahead, a flash of clothing, the weird way something was running on all fours yet wearing a jacket. 3 minutes into the chase, the sound stopped. We halted, breathing hard, listening. The forest had gone completely silent. No insects, no night birds, nothing. "Where did he go?" Nate whispered, sweeping his flashlight in a wide arc. I checked all directions, but the dense trees and bushes showed nothing. "I don't know. Spread out 10 feet apart. Move slow." We searched for 20 minutes but found no trace. No footprints, no broken branches beyond where we'd lost him. No signs anyone had passed through that section of forest. The tracking dogs refused to follow any scent trail beyond where we'd lost sight of the man, whining and backing away when handlers tried to make them go forward. When we returned to the campsite, the entire Mitchell family was huddled by their rekindled fire. Sarah had her arms around the children, who looked wide-eyed with fear. "Did you catch him?" David asked. "No," I admitted. "We lost him in the woods." "That wasn't a person," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Did you see his face? His smile?" I tried to offer reassurance. "Ma'am, it was dark, and sometimes our minds—" "Don't!" She cut me off. "Don't tell me it was my imagination. We all saw him. You saw him." I couldn't argue with that. I had seen him, and whatever I'd seen was hard to explain. "We're leaving first thing in the morning," David said firmly. "I don't care about the reservation or the money. We're going home." "I understand," I said. "One of us will stay with you until daylight." Nate volunteered for the first watch while I returned to the station to report the incident and organize a proper search for morning. When I told Greg what we'd seen, he didn't seem surprised, just grim. "Get a team together," he said. "Include the dog unit from Kalispell." "You think we'll find him?" Greg gave me a long look. "No, but you need to try anyway." The search lasted 5 days. We brought in rangers from other districts, tracking dogs, even a helicopter on day 3. We found nothing. No campsite, no tracks, no trace of anyone passing through that section of forest. The Mitchell family left that morning as promised, packing up with the efficient speed of people who couldn't get away fast enough. I didn't blame them. Before they left, Sarah took me aside. "There's something else," she said quietly, glancing at her family loading the last bags into their van. "The first night, when I thought I saw someone watching us, Amy woke up crying in the middle of the night, saying a man with a big smile was looking at her through the tent window. I wrote up the official report with all the proper, acceptable language. Suspected trespasser, possibly mentally ill individual, search concluded without result. But in my personal journal, I recorded exactly what I'd seen. The strange movements, the too wide grin, the clicking sounds, the way he moved so fast through the woods. Over the years, I got other reports that matched the same description. Hikers who felt watched. Campers who saw someone standing just past their firelight. A maintenance worker who met a smiling man who asked for directions using only clicking sounds, then vanished when the worker looked away for a second. Each time, searches found nothing. Each time, I added notes to my private journal. Each time, I remembered Greg's warning from my first day. If you see something that doesn't make sense, walk the other way. I should have listened. I sat back from my notebook, my hand cramped from writing about the strange man in the woods. The encounter with the Mitchell family had marked the beginning of my awareness that something wasn't right in certain parts of the park. But not everything that happened at Glacier fell into the category of unexplainable. Sometimes the darkness came from a more common source. Summer of 2001 started like most others. Crowded trails, constant radio chatter, and the usual collection of lost hikers and minor injuries. By then, I'd been a ranger for 14 years, long enough to handle most situations on autopilot. I was working alone at the Swift Current Ranger Station one afternoon in late July. filing reports and restocking first aid supplies, when the door banged open. A man stumbled in, covered in blood. It soaked his blue hiking shirt, splattered his pants, and smeared his hands and face. His eyes were wide with panic. "Help!" he gasped, grabbing the counter to steady himself. "My friend, bear attack, Iceberg Lake Trail." I rushed around the counter and guided him to a chair. "Where are you hurt?" He shook his head. "Not me, Michael. We were hiking and a bear came out of nowhere." I ran. I shouldn't have left him, but I panicked and ran. He was covered in blood, but I couldn't find any injuries, not a scratch. That struck me as odd, but adrenaline can make people ignore their own wounds. "I'm Ranger Walker," I said, grabbing the radio. "What's your name?" Jacob Turner." "And your friend?" "Michael Reed." I called in the emergency, requesting backup and medical support. "Bear attack victim on Iceberg Lake Trail. One hiker unaccounted for. Sending search and rescue team immediately." I gave dispatch Jacob's description of the attack location, about 2 miles up the trail near a distinctive rock formation. Ryan Peterson arrived within 15 minutes, followed shortly by Jennifer Martinez. As they got their rescue gear ready, I cleaned some of the blood from Jacob's hands and face, looking more carefully for injuries. "Are you sure you weren't hurt?" I asked. "No, it's all Michael's blood," he said, his voice hollow. I tried to help him, but there was so much blood. Ryan came over, notepad ready. "Mr. Turner, can you describe the bear?" "Brown, big." Jacob's hands were shaking. "It happened so fast." "Did it chase you?" I asked. "No, I just ran. I heard Michael screaming, but..." He put his head in his hands. I left him there. "You did the right thing getting help," Jennifer said, checking the medical kit. "Fighting a bear would have just given it 2 victims." Something wasn't adding up. Bear attacks were rare, but not unheard of. When they did happen, the bear typically charged anybody nearby. It seemed unusual that it would focus solely on Michael while ignoring Jacob. We headed out with a full search team, leaving Jacob at the station with a paramedic to check him over and get more details. I'd asked him to sketch a map of where the attack happened. The Iceberg Lake Trail was busy with hikers heading back to their cars as afternoon faded. We stopped each group, warning them about the bear and asking if they'd seen anything unusual. Nobody had reported seeing a bear or hearing any commotion that would suggest an attack. Ryan walked alongside me as we pushed up the trail. "Something feel off to you?" "Yeah," I admitted. "No injuries on the friend despite all that blood. No hikers saw or heard anything. And bear attacks in the middle of a busy trail on a clear day are pretty unusual." "Could be lying about the location," Jennifer suggested from behind us. "Might have happened off trail." We kept going up, getting to the area Jacob had told us about after about an hour and a half. We didn't see any victims, blood, or signs of bears. We made our search area bigger, looking through the bushes and checking ravines where someone could have fallen. Almost 4 hours into the search, one of the team members radioed from half a mile east of the trail. "Found something." We hurried to the spot, a small clearing with pine trees all around. I felt sick when I saw it. A body was lying face down in dried blood. The ripped hiking clothes showed deep wounds on the back and sides, and about 30 feet away stood a grizzly bear. "Nobody move," I whispered, raising my rifle. The others did the same, forming a line between the bear and the body. The animal was a male grizzly around 400 pounds. But he wasn't acting aggressive. No raised fur, no teeth bared. He actually took a step back as we approached. "Wait," Ryan said quietly. "Look at how he's behaving. He's scared, not aggressive." Jennifer trained her rifle on the bear but held her fire. "And look at the blood pattern." She was right. If a bear had attacked here, we'd see signs of struggle. Blood spatter in multiple directions, drag marks. Instead, most of the blood pooled under the body, with some splatter pointing from a single direction. The bear huffed and backed away further, then turned and walked heavily into the trees. We waited until it was gone before approaching the body. "That's weird," Ryan said. "Bears usually guard their kills, especially ones this fresh." I knelt next to the body while Jennifer checked around the area. The victim was male, late 30s to early 40s, wearing hiking clothes that matched Jacob's description of Michael Reed. But as I looked closely at the wounds, I got more and more doubtful. These weren't the ragged tears left by claws or teeth. Many of the wounds had clean edges with distinct entry and exit points. "These are knife wounds," I said. "Someone stabbed him repeatedly." Ryan nodded. "I'll check the area." I photographed the scene while Jennifer started taking notes. The wounds told a clear story. Multiple stab wounds to the back and sides, defensive cuts on the hands. Michael had been attacked from behind but managed to turn and fight back before succumbing to his injuries. "Over here!" Ryan called from about 20 yards away. He pointed to a patch of disturbed earth near a fallen log. Half buried under leaves and dirt was a hunting knife with a black handle, its blade crusted with dried blood. We documented and bagged the knife, then carefully turned the body over. Michael's face showed shock and pain. No wounds on the front except cuts on his hands and forearms where he'd tried to defend himself. This wasn't a bear attack. Michael had been murdered. We radioed our findings to the station and to park headquarters. When we carried Michael's body out 4 hours later, county sheriff's deputies were waiting with forensics specialists. Jacob Turner sat in the back of a patrol car, his shocked look now just a blank stare. The knife had clear fingerprints that matched Jacob's. The blood on his clothes was Michael's. When they questioned him at the sheriff's station, Jacob's story completely fell apart. I was there for the interrogation as the responding ranger. Jacob sat hunched in the metal chair, not looking like the panicked victim anymore. "We were arguing about the business," he finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "We started a tech company together 3 years ago. Michael wanted to sell it, take an offer that came in last month. I thought we should hold out for more." The argument had escalated on their hike. Jacob claimed Michael threatened to force the sale by invoking some clause in their contract. "I just got so angry," Jacob said, staring at his hands. "The knife was right there in my pack because we were going to cook at the campsite that night. I didn't plan it. I just grabbed it and..." He looked up, eyes red. "I panicked afterward. Thought maybe I could make it look like a bear attack. There are bears out there, right? It could happen." I was reminded of the many safety talks I'd given over the years, warning hikers about wildlife dangers. Jacob had twisted that real danger into a cover for his crime. The case was straightforward after that. Jacob pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a 30-year sentence. The park rangers who responded, Ryan, Jennifer, and I, each gave testimony about the scene and the evidence we found. When I drove back to my cabin after the trial, I thought about how different this case was from the other incidents I'd written down in my private journals. Jacob's actions were awful, but they were human. I could make sense of why he did it. See how things went from an argument to violence to him trying to hide it. Unlike the strange man in the woods or the other things I'd run into over the years, human violence makes sense. It's terrible, but there's always a reason. People kill because they're angry, scared, or greedy. It's ugly, but I get it. That's what made the other incidents so much more scary. I couldn't explain or understand them. I couldn't figure out why they happened or what these things wanted, if they wanted anything at all. I added the case to my official record of park incidents, but unlike the weird encounters, I didn't need to write it in my personal journal. Human criminals, at least, were something I knew how to deal with. I closed the file cabinet on the Turner case with a heavy sigh. Human crimes were ugly, but at least I could wrap my head around them. Not everything I encountered at Glacier fit into those neat categories. The summer of 1995 marked my first run-in with something I still can't explain, something I've spent decades trying to understand. Nate and I were checking the eastern section of the park that June, a sprawling area with dense forest and few visitors. We split up that morning to cover more ground, agreeing to meet at the trail junction by noon. When I got there, Nate was already waiting, sitting on a fallen log with his water bottle clutched between his hands. He looked wrong, his normally relaxed face tight and pale, eyes fixed on the ground. "Hey," I said, dropping my pack. "You okay?" He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "I found something out there," he said. "What, like a marijuana grow? Poachers?" These were common enough problems that required our attention. "No." He took a deep breath. "A staircase." I laughed. "What, like from one of the old park buildings?" He shook his head. "Just a staircase. Standing by itself in a small clearing. Wooden steps, fancy handrail, carpet running up the middle." His voice dropped lower. "Like someone took it out of a nice house and just stuck it in the middle of nowhere." My smile faded as I got a better look at him. Nate didn't spook easily. We'd dealt with aggressive bears, armed trespassers, and rescue operations in blizzard conditions. I'd never seen him rattled like this. "If you ever see stairs in the woods," he said, looking straight at me, "just walk away." I wanted to press him for details, but something in his eyes stopped me. We hiked back to the truck, mostly in silence. Over the next few days, Nate avoided the subject entirely, and when I finally asked again, he shut it down. "I told you what I saw," he said. "I don't want to talk about it anymore." I let it go, figuring he'd either tell me when he was ready or it would turn out to be nothing. Maybe a ranger project he didn't know about, or some weird art installation from a trespasser. 3 weeks later, I found out Nate wasn't joking, confused, or seeing things. I was checking trail conditions near Ptarmigan Tunnel, making my way through a part of the forest where the pines grew so thick you could barely see the sky. It was always dark and quiet in there, nothing like the rest of the park. As I came around a bend in the trail, I stepped into a small clearing and froze. There they were, 15 wooden steps coming up from the forest floor, leading to nothing but empty air. The staircase looked like it had been cut from a house, with the top ending suddenly as if a second floor should have been there. The wood looked new and smooth, each step covered with burgundy carpet that didn't have a single leaf or pine needle on it. A dark wooden handrail curved up alongside the steps, ending in a fancy carved post at the top. I rubbed my eyes, sure I wasn't seeing right. The staircase didn't just look out of place. It looked impossible. Everything in these mountains got beat up quickly. Sun-faded colors, rain-warped wood, snow, and ice-cracked stone. But this staircase looked like it had been built that morning, perfect and untouched. The forest floor around the stairs was normal, pine needles, dirt, a few fallen branches, but in a circle around the base of the stairs, the ground seemed flatter, more even, like it had been specially prepared. I walked around it slowly, keeping my distance. From every angle, the staircase looked solid and real. I could see the grain in the wood, the weave in the carpet. My training kicked in. I needed to document this. I pulled out my camera, we still used film in those days, and took several photos. When I finished, I remembered Nate's warning and backed away without touching the stairs. When I showed Nate later that day, his face turned white. "Where exactly?" he asked, voice tight. I told them where it was. "Don't go back there," he said. "But what is it?" I asked. "Some kind of art project? Movie prop?" "The one I found was near Boulder Pass," Nate said. "That's more than 20 miles from your spot." "So there's more than one?" "I don't know what they are," he admitted. "But they're not right, Tom. They don't belong here." When my film was developed the next week, I flipped through the prints and got more confused with each one. The photos from before and after the staircase were perfect. Trail markers, landscapes, even a moose I'd spotted near a stream. But every frame where I'd photographed the stairs showed nothing but an empty clearing. Just trees and ground where I knew the structure had stood. I went back to check if the stairs were gone, but they were still there exactly as before, perfect and out of place. This time I brought a digital camera, thinking maybe the film had some issue. Looking at the display, I saw only trees and empty ground where the stairs stood right in front of me. Over the next few years, Nate and I quietly kept track of staircase sightings throughout the park. We never put them in official reports. Who would believe us? But we made our own map, noting some patterns. They always appeared in small clearings. They never showed up in the same spot twice. They seemed more common during the new moon. They could be found miles from any trail or right beside popular paths. Each staircase looked different. Some spiral, some straight, some with carpet, others bare wood. But all looked brand new. Electronics didn't work right around them. Cameras showed nothing. Compasses spun in circles. Radios picked up only static. We made sure never to touch them or climb them. We warned other experienced rangers quietly. If you see stairs in the woods, walk away and tell either me or Nate. Most of the veterans took it seriously. They'd been around long enough to know the park had things that didn't make sense. In 2004, our unofficial warning system failed badly. Daniel Cooper joined our ranger staff that May, fresh from training and full of energy. At 24, he tackled his new job with complete confidence, seeing the park as beautiful but easy to understand. During his orientation, I covered all the standard stuff. Afterward, I took him aside for what Greg called the other talk. There are things in this park that don't make sense, I told him, keeping my voice casual. If you ever run into something that feels wrong, really wrong, trust that feeling and walk away. Like what? He asked, looking both curious and doubtful. Like a staircase standing by itself in the forest, I said. Daniel laughed. A staircase? For real? I'm not joking, Daniel. If you see stairs in the woods, don't go near them. Don't touch them. Just note where they are and walk away. He nodded, but the smirk never left his face. He didn't believe me. On August 17th, Daniel patrolled the area near Two Medicine Lake. It was routine work, checking camping permits, reminding visitors about bear safety, watching for rule breakers. He checked in by radio at noon, reporting all clear. That was the last anyone heard from him. When he missed his 4 p.m. check-in, we started search procedures. Given his assigned area, we expected to find him quickly. I joined the search team with 4 other rangers, including Nate and Ryan Peterson. We split into pairs and searched his section of trail. Ryan and I took the eastern shore of the lake. After about 2 hours, Ryan's radio crackled. We found Cooper's pack, Nate said through the static. Half-mile north of the ranger station, just off trail. No sign of him. Ryan and I headed to the location. When we arrived, a sick feeling hit my stomach. Nate stood at the edge of a small clearing. In the center stood a staircase, 13 steps of dark wood with iron railings, leading nowhere. Daniel's backpack lay at the bottom of the steps. His radio, water bottle, and trail map were scattered nearby, as if dropped in a hurry. No, I said quietly, already knowing. Top of the stairs, Nate said, his voice flat. Ryan looked between us, confused. What's going on? What is this thing doing out here? We walked forward together. Daniel Cooper lay on the top step, one arm hanging over the edge. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His face was frozen in an expression I'll never forget, complete terror, mouth open in a silent scream. Ryan rushed to check for a pulse. I knew it was pointless. He's cold, Ryan confirmed, fingers pressed against Daniel's neck. Been dead for hours. There were no visible injuries, no blood, no bruising, nothing to suggest a fall or animal attack. Daniel looked perfectly fine except for the horrible look on his face. The investigation that followed created more questions than answers. The medical examiner found no cause of death, no heart attack, no stroke, no poison in his system. Daniel had been in perfect health. The official ruling eventually came back as an aneurysm, even though there was no evidence for it. The administration wanted the case closed, the unexplainable explained away. I knew better. We all did. After Daniel's death, Greg set up a formal, if carefully worded, protocol. Rangers were to report any unusual structures found in the backcountry and stay a safe distance away until senior staff could check them out. Nobody wrote the word staircases in any official document. Too weird for the record, But the verbal warning became part of every new ranger's training. The stairs kept appearing throughout the park. Some years we'd find 5 or 6, other years none at all. We mapped them, checked their appearances against weather patterns, moon phases, and visitor numbers, looking for any connection that might help us understand. But they remained as mysterious as they were dangerous. I've tried for decades to make sense of these stairs. My best guess, as weak as it sounds, is that they're connected to thin spots between our world and somewhere else. They might be doors or windows into places humans aren't supposed to go. Whatever happened to Daniel Cooper that day didn't leave any mark a doctor could find. But the look on his face told me everything I needed to know about what happens when you climb those stairs. This is why I'm writing everything down now. Because the stairs are still showing up. Because rangers and visitors are still at risk. And because whoever comes after me needs to know the truth, no matter how crazy it sounds. If you see stairs in the woods, just walk away. But the stairs weren't the only unexplainable danger lurking in Glacier National Park. Water held its own mysteries. July 12th, 2008 started like any summer day in the park, busy but manageable. I'd been on duty since 6 a.m., handling the usual mix of lost hikers and minor first aid cases. Just after 2 p.m., my radio suddenly buzzed with an urgent call. "Emergency at Bowman Lake, possible drowning!" I grabbed my pack and ran for my truck. Bowman Lake was one of the more remote areas in the park, a 40-minute drive from my station on mostly unpaved roads. The whole way there, I kept hoping it was just a scare. Maybe someone who couldn't swim had gone too deep and been pulled out in time. My hopes died when I arrived at the shore. A small crowd had gathered around someone, laid out on the rocky beach. I parked and jogged over, medical kit in hand. People moved aside as I approached, their faces telling me everything before I even saw her. A young woman lay on a towel, her skin pale blue-gray. 2 men knelt beside her performing CPR, one doing chest compressions while the other gave rescue breaths. Water pooled beneath her blonde hair, soaking into the towel. Neither man looked up as I joined them. "I'm Ranger Walker," I said, kneeling to check her pulse. Nothing. "How long has she been out of the water?" "Maybe 15 minutes, said the man doing compressions. His arm shook with exertion. "We've been doing CPR the whole time." I nodded and took over the breathing portion, giving the second man a break. Her lips were cold against the rescue mask. After another 10 minutes, paramedics arrived and took over with their advanced equipment. 20 minutes later, they called it. She was gone. Her name was Emma Clark, 26 years old. She'd been a competitive swimmer in college. According to her boyfriend, she'd just been wading in the shallows when she suddenly screamed and disappeared under the surface. While the paramedics covered her body and prepared for transport, I started gathering statements. The lake looked calm and blue behind us, like nothing had happened there. "I was setting up our tent," said a woman who'd been camping nearby. "I heard splashing and screaming. By the time I got to the shore, I could just see her arms. Then nothing." "The water was completely still," another camper insisted. "No waves, no nothing. Then suddenly she was just gone." Their accounts matched. One moment Emma was fine, laughing and wading ankle deep. The next she was screaming and fighting against something pulling her down. Emma's boyfriend sat apart from the others, a blanket draped over his shoulders even in the summer heat. His eyes never left the ambulance where they'd taken her body. I sat beside him on the rocky shoreline. "I'm very sorry for your loss," I said. "I know this is difficult, but can you tell me what happened?" Christopher Anderson, Chris, was 27 with the empty-eyed look of someone whose life had just fallen apart. He talked in a flat voice that broke sometimes. "We came up from Missoula for the weekend," he said. "Emma loved swimming here. She was on the swim team at U of M for 4 years. He took a deep breath. "We were just wading. The water wasn't even to her knees. She was laughing about how cold it was. Then she screamed. Did you see what happened?" He nodded slowly. Something grabbed her ankle. She fell forward and started clawing at the water, trying to pull herself back to shore. I ran to help her, but she went under so fast, like something yanked her down. His voice shook. I dove in after her. The water wasn't even up to my chest where she went under, but I couldn't find her at first. Then I saw her just floating there under the surface. I wrote everything down, asking for details about what he'd seen. Had Emma hit her head? Had she mentioned feeling dizzy or unwell beforehand? The answer was no to everything. She'd been perfectly healthy and happy minutes before she drowned. The autopsy confirmed drowning as the cause of death. Her lungs were full of lake water. No signs of trauma, no heart defects, no drugs or alcohol in her system. Nothing to explain why a strong swimmer would drown in 4 feet of calm water. Park officials quickly settled on 2 possible explanations: an underwater current that had caught her by surprise, or entanglement with lake vegetation. Both seemed reasonable to people who hadn't been there. Both gave everyone an easy answer. But I knew Bowman Lake. There were no strong currents in that cove, especially on a calm day, and a survey of the area showed very little vegetation, certainly nothing that could trap and drown a swimmer like Emma. 2 days after the drowning, I went back to the lake with water testing equipment. The official investigation was closed, but questions kept bugging me. I took samples from where Emma had drowned and from other areas of the lake for comparison. The temperature readings troubled me immediately. July in Montana meant warm surface water, usually around 65 degrees in the shallows of Bowman Lake. But the spot where Emma had drowned was 48 degrees, nearly 20 degrees colder than areas just 10 feet away. I checked and rechecked my equipment, thinking it must be broken. It wasn't. As I waded into the water to take more readings, I noticed something else. The small fish that usually swim around the rocks near shore were completely missing from the area where Emma had drowned. A clear circle, about 15 feet across, had no fish at all. I never included these findings in my official report. How could I explain a cold spot with no clear source, or fish that seemed to know to stay away? What bothered me most was something Chris had said during our follow-up interview a week after the incident. I'd asked if he'd noticed anything unusual about the lake that day, anything at all that seemed off or different. The water felt wrong, he said, looking down at his hands. When I dove in to find her, it felt heavy, like swimming through syrup, and cold, so cold it hurt my skin. He looked up at me. That's not normal, is it? I didn't have an answer for him. Not one I could put in an official report, anyway. For months afterward, I returned to Bowman Lake regularly to check the water. The cold spot stayed until late October, then suddenly disappeared. By the following spring, fish had come back to the area. To anyone else, it would seem like nothing had ever happened there. Chris never accepted the official explanation. He came back to the park multiple times that summer, taking his own water samples, talking to other swimmers, trying to understand what had happened. Eventually, he stopped coming. I filed away the Emma Clark case with my other unexplained incidents. On the surface, it had a logical explanation. Sometimes even strong swimmers drown. But underneath, I knew it connected to the other strange things I'd documented over the years. The unnatural man with the clicking teeth, the fog that confused hikers and led them in circles. Different types, same underlying wrongness. Nate and I talked about the drowning over beers at my cabin one night that fall. You think it's connected to the other stuff? He asked. Has to be, I said. The cold spot, the fish staying away. Something was in that water that didn't belong there. Nate nodded slowly. Greg told me once to watch out for still water. Said sometimes it hides things. What kinds of things? He shrugged, picking at the label on his beer bottle. He wouldn't say exactly. Just that bodies of water that connect to underground systems can sometimes connect to other places too. I thought about Bowman Lake, fed by mountain streams and spring water filtering through very old rock formations. Who knew what lay beneath its surface? What hidden passages might exist in the limestone and granite? You notice these things seem to be happening more often? Nate asked after a long silence. I had noticed. My first strange encounter happened 6 years into my career. Then years might pass between incidents. Now they were happening every few months. The stairs showing up more often. Reports of strange figures near campsites. Hikers talking about lost time and trails that weren't where they should be. Maybe we're just more aware of them now, I suggested. We know what to look for. But Nate shook his head. They're increasing, Tom, and I think they're getting bolder. 4 years later, Nate would disappear while looking into something unusual near Haystack Butte. His words that night have stuck with me ever since. I never told Emma's parents or Chris about what I found at the lake. How would it help them to know something not from our world had taken her? Some truths just make things worse. Instead, I added Emma's case to my collection of weird stuff that didn't add up, warnings for people who'd come after me. These weren't just random events. They showed that something strange is happening around us that we can't explain. It's out there, and it's dangerous. October 4th, 2012 started as an ordinary Thursday. The tourist season was winding down with most visitors gone and the park settling into its pre-winter quiet. The aspen trees had turned golden and the first dusting of snow had already touched the highest peaks. I spent the morning finishing paperwork in my office at park headquarters, planning to head out on trail checks after lunch. Around 11:30, Nate popped his head in my door. "Hey," he said, tossing an apple between his hands. "I'm heading up to check the Highline Trail. Want to come?" I looked down at the stack of incident reports on my desk. "Can't today. Gotta finish these by 5. "Your loss," he said with a grin. "Weather's perfect up there." I nodded absently, already back to my paperwork. "Take lots of pictures for me." "Always do." He lingered in the doorway. "Oh, I'm going to swing by Haystack Butte too. Got a report of something unusual there yesterday." That made me look up. "What kind of unusual?" He shrugged. "Probably nothing. Hiker said they saw what looked like a door in the rock face. Might just be a shadow or weathered formation, but worth checking." "Want me to come after I finish here?" "We shouldn't check that kind of thing alone." The words came automatically, part of our unwritten protocol for investigating the unexplainable. "Nah, I'll just take a look. If it's actually something, I'll call it in and wait for backup." He tapped the radio on his belt. "I'm not going to do anything stupid." "All right, check in every 2 hours?" "Yes, Mom." He rolled his eyes but smiled. "I'll radio at 1, 3, and 5. Should be back by 7 at the latest." That was the last real conversation I had with Nathan Harris. He radioed at 1:05 p.m. as promised. "Walker, this is Harris. At Logan Pass. Heading out on Highline now. All quiet so far." His 3 p.m. check-in came about 10 minutes late. "Walker, Harris here. Just past Haystack. Checking that spot now. We'll radio when I'm headed back." That was it. When 5 p.m. came and went with no word, I tried calling him. "Harris, this is Walker. You copy?" Static answered me. I tried twice more before walking to dispatch and asking Linda to try on the main system. "Ranger Harris, this is dispatch. Please respond." More static. "He's probably just in a dead zone," Linda said, but I heard the slight concern in her voice. We both knew Nate wasn't one to miss check-ins. "I'm going to drive up to Logan Pass," I said. "If he radios in, let me know immediately." The drive to Logan Pass usually took about an hour from headquarters. I made it in 45 minutes, feeling more worried with each mile. The visitor center was closed for the season, and the parking lot was almost empty. Nate's truck was parked near the trailhead. I parked next to it and got out. The sun was low in the sky. The wind was cold up on the pass, like winter was coming soon. I tried Nate's radio again. Nothing. Looking through his truck window, I saw his lunch cooler on the passenger seat, unopened. His personal backpack was on the floor, only his ranger pack wasn't there. I called headquarters from my truck radio. "This is Walker. Harris's vehicle is at Logan Pass, but no sign of him. His lunch is still in the truck and he's not responding to radio calls." "Copy that, Walker," came the response. "Do you want to begin search procedures?" "Yes, get a team up here ASAP. I'm going to check the first mile of trail before it gets dark." That first evening, 6 of us searched the immediate area of the Highline Trail with headlamps and flashlights, calling Nate's name into the darkening wilderness. The beam of my flashlight caught every movement, branches swaying in the wind, small animals darting between rocks, but no sign of my friend. By morning, a full search operation was up and running. Rangers from 3 districts joined us, along with volunteer search and rescue teams from Kalispell and Whitefish. A helicopter looked over the area from above, while ground teams covered every section of the Highline Trail and surrounding areas. His last check-in mentioned Haystack Butte, I told the search coordinator, a veteran ranger named Mark Wilson. He said he was checking something unusual there. "What kind of unusual?" Mark asked. He didn't specify. I hesitated, but he was looking for what a hiker described as a door in the rock face. Mark gave me an odd look, but noted it in his search plan. "We'll concentrate extra resources in that area." On the second day, one of the search dogs alerted near a steep section of trail about 2 miles past Haystack Butte. The handler called us over, and we found Nate's ranger hat snagged on a branch below the trail. It was the first sign of him we'd found. The area got our full attention. Teams carefully made their way down the steep slope below where the hat was found, checking every crevice and patch of vegetation. The dogs followed a scent trail for about 50 yards, and then it just stopped. Not the usual gradual fading away. It just ended suddenly, like Nate had disappeared into thin air. That evening, alone, after the search teams had returned to base camp, I went back to where we'd found the hat. Something about the area bothered me, though I couldn't put my finger on what. The light was fading fast, but I wanted one more look. I crouched down, touching the rough ground where the dogs had lost Nate's scent. The soil felt weirdly cold even though the sun had been out all day. Looking more carefully, I saw what looked like large dents in the dirt. Not really footprints, more like the kind of marks a heavy couch leaves on carpet. Following these marks, I walked about 20 feet to where they just stopped at a rock wall. The marks led straight to the solid rock and didn't go around it. I ran my hand over the cool rock surface. It looked totally normal, just an old rock that had been sitting there for ages. Then I noticed the smell, a weird, sweet smell I'd never come across in the park before. It was like really ripe fruit mixed with something like nail polish remover. When I took one deep breath, my head got dizzy and my vision got blurry. I backed up quickly, covering my nose with my jacket sleeve. The smell stuck in my nose, making it hard to think straight. I pulled out my flashlight and checked the rock more carefully, but didn't find anything strange. No cracks, no openings, nothing that looked like a door like the hiker had talked about. When it got completely dark, I headed back to base camp, though I didn't want to leave. I told Mark about the marks and the smell, and he sent a team with scientific equipment the next morning. They found nothing, no weird marks, no strange smell, no sign anything had been there at all. "You were tired," Mark suggested gently. "We all are. Maybe what you saw was just shadows or animal tracks." I didn't argue, but I knew what I'd found. Something had been there, something that had taken Nate and then erased its own tracks. The search continued for 11 more days. We brought in more dogs, more helicopters, teams with thermal imaging equipment. We searched every trail, drainage, and animal path within a 5-mile radius of where the hat was found. The autumn weather turned against us with rain and then snow, erasing whatever traces might have remained. On the 13th day, with snow falling steadily and temperatures dropping, the park superintendent made the call I'd been dreading. "We have to suspend the active search," she told me, her face grave. "We'll keep investigating, of course, but we can't keep the full team out here with winter coming." I knew she was right. The conditions were becoming dangerous for the searchers themselves. but accepting it felt like giving up on Nate. "What's the official line?" I asked. "Based on where the hat was found in the terrain, the most likely explanation is that he fell from one of the cliffs along the trail," she said. "With the vegetation and the rainfall we've had, finding remains could take months or years, if ever." It was the explanation that made the most sense to anyone who didn't know Nate like I did. He had hiked the Highline Trail hundreds of times in every kind of weather. He knew all the dangerous spots, every loose rock, and he was always careful. The biggest problem with the official story was what we never found. No backpack, no radio, no water bottle. If he had fallen, these things would have gone down with him. Finding only his hat made me think something else happened. Something took Nate, but left his hat behind. The search teams packed up and left. The incident report was filed. They marked the search areas on maps. They told Nate's family they'd done everything possible and would follow up on any new clues. His name went on the list of people who walked into the wilderness and just never came back. But I knew the truth, or at least part of it. Nate hadn't fallen. He wasn't attacked by an animal or lost his way. He had found something weird near Haystack Butte, something tied to the strange stuff we'd been tracking for years. Whatever was out there in those wild places had taken him, just like it took others before, and I hadn't been there to watch his back. 5 years went by since Nate went missing, and I felt his absence more every day. The official search had ended years ago, with his name just becoming another number in the park's missing persons list. But I never quit looking, never stopped hoping to find out what happened. By 2017, I was way older than when most rangers call it quits. My knees and back hurt more each year, and I couldn't move as fast anymore. Greg Mills had retired long ago, making me the ranger who'd been around the longest. The bosses kept talking about retirement packages and training new people, but I couldn't leave. Not while we still didn't know what happened to Nate. In late September, I started hearing something that got my attention. 3 different hiking groups said they saw a weird man near Sperry Glacier. They all described him the same way: tall, really skinny, moving strangely, and watching hikers from far away. One group said they heard a clicking sound when they called out to him. When I heard this, I got really worried. I knew exactly what they were seeing, the same strange figure I'd run into with the Mitchell family 24 years earlier. The same kind of thing that had been showing up more and more throughout the park. After the 3rd story, in less than 2 weeks, I decided to go check it out myself. I was old enough to retire, and we had rules about not checking out weird stuff alone, but I felt I had to go. This had something to do with Nate. I just knew it. I packed more stuff than usual, extra water, food for 3 days, even though I planned to stay just one night, more flashlights, batteries, and my personal GPS along with the park-issued one. I told dispatch exactly where I was going and marked my route on their map. "I'll be checking the Sperry Glacier area overnight," I told Linda, who'd been running dispatch for nearly as long as I'd been a ranger. "Those reports of strange activity need following up." Linda gave me a concerned look. "You sure you don't want to take someone with you? Ryan's available tomorrow." "No need to pull him from his scheduled duties," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's probably just someone camping illegally. I'll radio in at the usual check-in times." She didn't look convinced, but nodded. "Be careful out there, Tom." The hike to Sperry Glacier took most of the day. The trees were turning orange and yellow with fall colors, but I wasn't really paying attention. I kept thinking about what I might find, and if it had anything to do with Nate going missing 5 years ago. I got to the area from the reports by mid-afternoon. The glacier was pretty impressive, though it was smaller than when I first saw it years ago. Global warming was shrinking it, just like all the others. I spent a few hours searching the area, looking for any sign of the person mentioned in the reports. Nothing weird stood out. Other hikers passed by heading down the mountain, but nobody said they'd seen anything strange that day. As it started getting dark, I was about to set up camp when I spotted something. Fresh footprints in some soft dirt going away from the main trail. They were human-sized, but looked odd, like whoever made them walked funny or had a limp. I followed them, even though I probably shouldn't have. The tracks went off the main trails, across some rocks where I lost them, then showed up again in dirt patches between rocks. I felt more and more nervous as I kept going, but couldn't make myself turn back. The footprints went over a small hill and down into a valley I'd never been to before. As I walked down between two big rocks, I suddenly came out into a small clearing with short pine trees all around it. Right in the middle of the clearing was a staircase, clean wooden steps with a fancy handrail going up to nowhere. It looked like the ones Nate and I had found before, but bigger and fancier. The wood looked new and shiny, and the dark red carpet on it was super clean even though it was sitting outside in the middle of nowhere. What really surprised me was the cabin next to it. Not a regular park building or a basic shelter, but an actual wood cabin with a small porch and windows with curtains. I stopped and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I knew this park inside and out. This cabin wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't on any map or list of park buildings. For a few minutes, I just stood there, watching from the edge of the clearing. No smoke was coming from the chimney. No sounds came from inside. Everything was weirdly quiet. I walked up carefully, one hand on my radio, the other near my gun. The porch made a creaking sound when I stepped on it. At the door, I knocked loudly and announced who I was. "National Park Service, is anyone inside?" No answer came, but I felt certain I was being watched. I tried the handle, unlocked. The door swung open with a low groan. The interior was dimly lit by fading sunlight through the windows. A musty, sweet smell filled the space, reminding me of the strange odor I'd found at the spot where Nate's scent trail had ended. The cabin was just one room with basic stuff: a cot against one wall, a small table with a chair, a wood stove in the corner. But what caught my attention, what made me feel ice cold all over, were the walls. They were covered with photographs, dozens of them, pinned up with thumbtacks in a messy collage. As my eyes got used to the dim light, I began to make out the people in them. There was the Mitchell family from 1993 standing around their campfire. A moment I remembered seeing but had never photographed. Jacob Turner showed up in several images, including one that showed him stabbing Michael Reed, something no camera should have captured. Emma Clark swimming in Bowman Lake moments before she drowned, her face showing a smile that suddenly seemed horribly sad. Most disturbing were the photos of Nate. They started with pictures I knew well, Nate at park events, on patrol, standing next to me at different places over the years. Then came photos from the day he disappeared, showing him hiking along the High Line Trail, looking at something at Haystack Butte that the picture didn't quite show. But it was the next set of photos that made my legs weak. They showed Nate after his disappearance, aging over the past 5 years. His hair got grayer with each image, wrinkles deepened on his face. But worst was his expression, increasingly empty, his eyes looking more hollow, like something important was being slowly drained from him. The most recent photo, based on how Nate looked, couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. With shaking hands, I moved to the table where a leather-bound journal lay open. I knew Nate's handwriting right away, the way he crossed his T's and the slight slant to his letters. The entries were dated, starting shortly after he vanished in 2012 and continuing to now. I flipped through pages filled with notes about the others who lived in the spaces between the park. Nate wrote about beings that existed next to our reality but stayed mostly hidden, getting into our world through thin places that had been growing thinner over the decades. The stairs, according to his entries, were doors, spots between our reality and theirs. The figures we'd run into were either these beings themselves or humans they had collected and changed. My hands shook as I reached the final entry, dated just 1 week earlier. "Thomas, if you're reading this, leave now. They know you've seen too much. They're collecting us. The stairs are doors and they're beginning to open more frequently. Don't trust what you see. Don't follow the lights. And whatever you do, don't climb the stairs." Below this warning was a hastily scrawled addition. "They're coming back. I can hear them. Get out of the park, Tom. Get out while you still can." The journal fell from my hands. It was getting dark outside, and the forest was almost completely black. Then I heard it. The soft, rhythmic clicking sound from 24 years ago, the same one that's been in my nightmares ever since. I dropped the journal and ran for the door. The clicking sounds got louder, closer, coming from different directions toward the cabin. My hand struggled with the doorknob, wet with sweat. As I pulled it open, I grabbed Nate's journal from the floor and stuffed it inside my jacket. Outside, the forest looked completely different. Thick fog had shown up during the minutes I'd spent inside, making it hard to see trees more than 20 feet away. The mist moved weirdly, going against the breeze instead of with it. I ran away from the cabin and the staircase, going in what I thought was the way I'd come from. The clicking sounds followed, bouncing through the fog in a way that made it impossible to tell how close they were. I looked back once and saw dark shapes moving between the trees, tall, thin figures walking with that same odd, choppy movement I remembered from the Mitchell family campsite all those years ago. I ran for another 50 yards before stopping suddenly. The clearing opened up in front of me again. The same cabin, the same staircase. Somehow I'd circled back even though I'd run in a straight line. "This isn't possible," I muttered, checking my GPS unit. The screen displayed only static. I turned right fast, moving as quick as I could through the bushes. The fog stuck to my clothes and left a weird, oily film that smelled sweet and chemical. Breathing it in made my head fuzzy, and I couldn't tell which way I was going. After what felt like 10 minutes of hard hiking, I came to a clearing and stopped cold. The cabin was 20 yards away, with the staircase still sitting beside it. I felt a rush of panic. I pulled out my compass, which went crazy, the needle spinning in complete circles. I picked a direction and made myself walk that way, counting steps to stay on a straight line. 100 steps. 200. The fog got thicker, and the clicking sounds got closer. Something moved to my side, someone walking next to me through the trees, keeping up with me in a weird way. I kept walking without changing direction. 300 steps. 400. The fog started looking like people, but when I looked right at them, they vanished. Lights blinked between the trees like they wanted me to follow them. I remembered Nate saying, "Don't follow the lights," so I just looked at the path ahead. It got completely dark, and all I had was my flashlight beam, which only cut a few feet into the thick mist. I couldn't stop to make camp. Not with those things moving around me, making clicking sounds that jumped from right behind me to far away, messing with my head. I used my flashlight to mark my path and kept going, one foot after the other. My body was begging for rest, but every time I slowed down, the clicking got closer. I realized I was being pushed in a certain direction. I couldn't tell if it was toward something or away from it. Hours went by in a mix of being tired and scared. The fog stayed thick, and it never got light. My watch said it was 3 a.m., then 4, then 5. But it stayed completely dark, like time was stretching out. By when morning should have come, I was stumbling from being so tired. I'd been moving for almost 12 hours without stopping, almost out of water, running on nothing but fear. Just as I thought about giving up, the clicking sounds changed, becoming more jumpy, almost angry. The fog started to thin out, slowly at first, then faster. I could see stars overhead through gaps in the mist. The clicking got quieter, like they were watching me get away. I pushed ahead with new energy, and suddenly, I broke through. The fog ended like hitting a wall, and I was standing in clear early morning light. Behind me, a wall of mist hung in the air, staying in just one part of the forest. I turned slowly and looked around. I wasn't anywhere near Sperry Glacier. I didn't recognize the area or the mountains from this angle. My GPS started working again, and what it showed made no sense. I was near the eastern edge of the park, almost 15 miles from where I'd started hiking yesterday. I sat down hard on a rock when my legs gave out. As the sun came up, I took out Nate's journal to make sure it was real and not something I imagined because I was so tired. I opened it and saw his handwriting throughout, with notes and warnings. I used my radio to contact dispatch. Linda's voice came through right away, sounding relieved. "Walker, where have you been? You missed both check-ins yesterday. We were about to send out a search team." "I got lost," I said, the inadequacy of the words hitting me even as I spoke them. "I'm near—" I checked the GPS coordinates again, still disbelieving. "I'm near 2 Medicine, east side of the park." 2 Medicine? How did you get there from Sperry? "It's a long story. Can someone pick me up? I need to rest." 2 days later, after recovering from exhaustion and dehydration, I organized a search team to return to the area near Sperry Glacier. Ryan Peterson led one group, while I took 3 other rangers along a route I had carefully mapped out based on my GPS data before it failed. We found nothing. The clearing was gone. Or perhaps we never found the right clearing. The cabin and staircase had vanished, leaving no trace they had ever existed. No foundations, no footprints, not even broken branches where I remembered running through the bushes. "Are you sure this is the right area?" Ryan asked, looking around the seemingly undisturbed forest. "As sure as I can be," I replied, checking Nate's journal in my pack for the 100th time, reassuring myself it was still there. The search team spent 2 full days looking through the area, finding nothing unusual. They went along with me because I'd been around so long, but I could tell they didn't believe me by the looks they gave. Only Ryan seemed open to the idea that something weird had happened. That night at base camp, after everyone else went to bed, Ryan sat next to me by the fire. "You really think you found Nate?" he asked quietly. "I found evidence he was alive for years after his disappearance," I said. "The journal is his handwriting. The photos I saw in that cabin showed him aging over time." Ryan nodded slowly. "Kelly told me about some of the things you've been documenting over the years. The stairs, the strange figures." He poked at the fire with a stick. "I've seen things myself that don't make sense. Things I've never put in official reports." "Like what?" "Like the behavior of that bear at Michael Reed's body," he said. "It wasn't acting like a bear that had killed a man. It was positioned there like it was placed to create a story." I nodded, remembering the scene. Someone, or something, wanted us to believe it was a bear attack. Ryan looked up at the stars. "Kelly graduates from her training program next month. She's been assigned to Glacier." "She'll be a good ranger," I said. "She will, but she needs to know what she's walking into." He turned to me. "Would you stay on just for a while? Help train her about the things that aren't in the manuals?" The request surprised me, though perhaps it shouldn't have. I had been considering retirement for years, but something had always held me back. Now I understood what, or who, I had been waiting for. "I'll stay," I said. "Long enough to pass on what I know." A week after our failed search, I put in my retirement papers, setting the date for 6 months later. The next day, I started pulling together everything I knew about the weird stuff in the park, the stairs, the figures, and all the places where strange things kept happening. I used Nate's journal and my own notes to make maps of all the staircase sightings from the last 30 years, along with every time someone ran into those strange, clicking figures, and every unexplained disappearance. I started seeing patterns I hadn't noticed before. The stairs showed up most often during the new moon or in the 3 days after. The clicking figures stayed away from running water. Nobody ever reported seeing them near rivers or streams. In some parts of the park, time seemed to act funny, with hikers saying their watches stopped working or jumped ahead. When Kelly Peterson showed up in May wearing her ranger uniform, I could see Nate and how excited she was, Greg and how careful she was about details, and her dad Ryan in the way she noticed everything. She was going to need all that for what was coming. After her first week learning the basics, I asked her to come to my cabin for what would be our first evening talk. "Your dad thinks you should know about certain aspects of ranger work that aren't covered in training," I began. "The strange stuff?" she asked bluntly. At my surprised look, she smiled. "Dad's been telling me stories since I was a kid. I never knew if they were true or just meant to scare me away from wandering off alone." I pulled out Nate's journal and handed it to her. "They're true. All of them. And more." Over the next 4 months, Kelly became a student I never expected to have. She looked at these strange events with curiosity instead of fear, taking careful notes and asking questions that made me think about things I hadn't considered before. "If the stairs are doors," she said one evening, flipping through Nate's journal, "are they coming into our world or are we going into theirs?" "Both, I think," I replied. Nate wrote about thin places where the boundaries between realities wear down. The stairs are visible manifestations of these crossing points. Kelly nodded, making notes in her own journal. "And they're getting more frequent according to your records. What happens if the boundaries keep thinning?" It was a question I didn't have an answer for, and one that haunted my thoughts afterward. As I got closer to retiring, I worked with Kelly to set up new safety rules. Rangers had to work in pairs when checking far-off areas. We'd only visit certain spots during specific moon phases. We put trail cameras to watch known weird spots. And GPS trackers would ping the office if a ranger didn't move for more than 4 hours in certain areas. We couldn't put the real reasons for these changes in official paperwork, of course. On paper, they were safety measures against wildlife, bad weather, and lost hikers. But the rangers who'd been in the park long enough, who had seen their own weird stuff, knew the real reason. My last official day came on a cool October morning, 26 years to the day after I'd first met the clicking man near the Mitchell family campsite. The staff threw a retirement party at the office with cake, speeches, photos, and handshakes. I smiled and thanked them, acting like a happy retiree, while my mind kept going back to what was hiding in the dark parts of the park. As the party started to end, Kelly found me looking out the window toward the mountains. "You're not really leaving, are you?" she asked. "I'm moving to Whitefish," I said. "Close enough to come back when needed." "When, not if," she noted with a small smile. "There will always be more incidents," I said. "More stairs appearing, more figures watching from the trees. Whatever lives in the spaces between our world and theirs isn't going away. But we're better prepared now," Kelly said. "Thanks to you and Nate." I nodded. No amount of prep felt like enough when we knew so little about what we were facing. "Be careful out there. Don't take unnecessary risks, and remember, never climb the stairs," she finished. "I know." That evening, I packed the last of my stuff into my truck. My small cabin, where I'd lived for over 30 years, felt empty now. I'd given Nate's journal and my own records to Kelly, plus copies of the maps we'd made showing where weird things happened throughout the park. Standing on the porch one last time, I looked out at the wilderness I had worked in for 35 years. The pine trees moved in the evening breeze, their shapes dark against the sky. Out there, beyond the normal dangers like bears, storms, and rough terrain, something was waiting. Something that had taken Nate, Daniel Cooper, and many others before them. I knew the strange stuff would keep happening after I left. The stairs would still show up in small clearings, tempting people who didn't know better. The clicking things would watch from the edges of campsites, studying us like we were in a zoo. And someday, someone would need to do more than just write it down and stay away. Someone would need to face what was out there in the wild. But tonight, that job passed to others. I'd done what I could to get them ready. The rest was up to Kelly and those who would come after her, with all the information I'd collected over my lifetime. I got in my truck and drove away from Glacier National Park one last time, taking with me memories of both beautiful nature and scary things. and knowing that some mysteries of the wilderness would never make sense to people who were just passing through.